the most beautiful thing is, normally in Western logics, most mathematical logic, whatever, a fallacy belongs to an inference, right? It's a bad inference. But for us, a fallacy is a fact. A fallacy is in the world, out there, right? It's a piece of reality. So that's a huge difference in understanding of fallacy. So what blocks my bad inference? Not something that belongs to my bad inference, something in the real world. That blocks my bad inference, right? This is one very, very important aspect of Indian reasoning. Here are a few tarkas, the atmashriya, which is circularity, and anavastha, infinite regress, utsarga-apavada tarka, vyatya tarka. There are several tarkas. They help us revise our database, right? And we can see that the database is always provisional, and how Nyaya allows us to have a perfectly defeasible database, which must be revised by using all the pramāṇas and Tarka. So this is the topic. So now the first thing is the context, and I'll try to show how Indian reasoning is contextual. One very important thing to begin with is to understand that Indian arguments are not valid in the Western sense. So for us, validity, for the Indian context, validity is always contextual. How is it different from the Greek idea of validity? A little bit of this thing, comparison. So this is from Aristotle. Now, this is a passage from this prior analytics. You can very clearly see how it goes, right? Look at the argument. Alpha kata pantos to beta. Kai to beta kata pantos to gamma, right? This is basically saying that if A is predicated of all B and B of all gamma, means alpha is predicated of all beta and beta of all gamma, it must necessarily be predicated of all gamma, right? You can see that this is a valid argument. This is basically Barbara, right? So look what basically we are doing. Not that we can handle this in Indian. When I say we, I mean the Indian logicians. We can handle this because this rule is nothing but tadvyapyasya, vyapyatvat. And the second one is, again, if all gamma is beta, and if no beta is alpha, then no gamma is alpha, right? Which is very clearly understandable. For us, we would say that it's the same rule, actually. Tad viraha vyapyasya vyapyatvat. So this is the Western way of understanding validities. For them, as already we have seen that the meaning is not important, right? It is rather some placeholders, and that's it. So, and then that's the reason. So if my feeding is bad, if I do feed bad premises, I would get bad conclusions. But that's not a problem for them, because that is the whole thing. The whole point is the valid forms are given, forms are meaningless, forms are formal. You just have to put right premises. Then only you get the right conclusion. That's the whole idea. So this is basically formal validity. And also you can see that this is universal, right? Because you have something like all A's are B's and all B's are C's, therefore all A's are C's, is perfectly universal. You don't need a context for this. So it fits all contexts. This is basically validity in Greek logic. And the same idea of validity is pretty much there in classical Western logic, modern logic, mathematical logic. Same idea of validity. The idea doesn't change much. But then it is completely different for the Indian framework. What is it then? We will try to understand. You ask this question, whether this form, this all S is M, all M is P, hence this is the Roman representation of the Greek style of doing logic. That is this S and M, they use S and M for middle term. M is the middle term and S is the major term, and all that stuff. Now, is this valid? Yeah, of course, it is universally valid. But then, if you ask an Indian logician, a Nyayika, whether this argument is valid or not, that is, that hill has fire since that is smoke, is it pramanika? Is it valid or not? That question is pointless. That question cannot even be asked without giving a context to it, right? What is the context? We'll just see. So this is, as I said, it's a pointless question, whether this is valid or not, right? So then how to understand context for in the framework of Indian logic? That's what we're going to see. So what is a genuine reason, first of all? Now, the old Nyaya actually lists some features of the genuine reason. Those are given. So when you claim inferentially that SST since SSR, what are the things you are claiming? Whatever. So, but then we will get that later. But the point is, your claim must have these features if your claim has to be valid. What are those? The hetu must be present, the reason must be present in the site, right? First thing, otherwise no inference goes. And then a few things which we understand better when you have this picture. Because you see what is happening here. It's pretty evident that there are homologues where you know that the target, that is the sadhya, is there. And some heterologues where the target must not be there. So what are the homologues here? You can see the altar, you can see the kitchen, and you can see the hill where both fire and smoke coexist. And what are the heterologues? You can see the red hot iron ball, which doesn't have any fire. That means which doesn't have any smoke, but that has fire. That's a sapaksha. That's a homologue. I'm sorry. And what is heterologue? Jalakharada, right? A lake is a heterologue. Now you can see that the hetu, the reason, it may not be found in all homologues, but it must be found in some homologues if homologues are there. But one very important condition, that is called sapaksha-sattva, but one very important condition, it must be absent from all heterologues. So it cannot exist in a thing that does not have the sadhya, right? So that's called vipaksha-asattva. That's another very important feature of the hetu. So we can see a procedure how we understand it. So somebody who knows that anything that is smoke has fire, that means one who has we now know all these terms. So one knows the provision, goes somewhere and finds the smoke there. That is the paksha-sattva, right? So the moment that happens, you remember that this must be having fire. The thing is not that every inference would have both positive and negative drishtantas. That is, some inference, we are not getting into it. Some inferences cannot have sapakshas and some inferences cannot have vipakshas. We're not getting into it, but we generally understand what we mean by sapaksha and vipaksha and sapaksha-sattva and vipaksha-asattva. The last two features, that is R4 and R5, are not really there in this Vartika. They're rather there in Tatparya of Mishrapada. So the first one is the association with the target that is present in the site. That is abadhita vishayatva. So of course the target must be there in the site, in the paksha. Otherwise you don't infer something properly. And the last one is very interesting. I don't think you find it in any other logic anywhere. That is called Satpratipaksha. What is it? It is basically this. We will take some time talking about it. Suppose I'm trying to prove T in S by showing that it has got R. I must make sure this does not have another hetu, another reason Q that proves the absence of R, right? If both are there in one site, we have a problem called Satpratipaksha. In the new logic, that is Navya-Nyaya, in the old logic that is called prakarana sama, right? This is a very, very unique and interesting problem Indian logicians all the time thought about. So so now our genuine reason is kind of something that has all these 5 features, or maybe 4, because as I said, not that every anumati would have sapakshas, not that every anumitis have vipakshas, but if it has sapakshas, then in some of the sapakshas, the hetu or the reason must be there. And if it has vipakshas, then it must be absent. The hetu must be absent from all vipakshas. So these are the 5 features. Now see, all 5 are enumerated in the old Nyaya. There, you don't find an anugata dharma. You do not find one description of it, one intentional definition, right? You just find a list of all these. So that makes it kind of slightly different, enumeration based. Now, what do we understand by that? See, in the old Nyaya, what is the constraint? Now we shift from context to constraint, right? The variables are definitely S, T, and R. That is, S has T since it has R. You can make any inference. Unlike the Western axiomatic method, here you can make any inference. You can draw any inference by instantiating S, T, and R. That doesn't mean that every inference will be valid, right? Validity is a different thing altogether. We'll see that. So there are 3 variables. And what are the constraints? The constraint is basically a conjunction of A through E. That is all the 5 features we mentioned. That's the old Nyaya system. But then, what is the constraint in the new Nyaya? We'll see what Gangesha did was a huge achievement because he gave us an anugata dharma to actually cover all those things, all those features old Nyaya was mentioning, just to find one dharma that is an intentional definition he was looking for, and he achieved that goal. So that's a huge difference. For example, look at this. We are trying to understand constraint in this context. So if you have this equation 4x plus 2 is 10, what are the constraints? The constraint is this, that you have to find a number which satisfies the constraint. What is it? It results in 10 when one multiplies it by 4 and then adds 2 to the product, right? This is the very simple understanding of a constraint. So what must you do to achieve this equation or to satisfy this equation, right? So that's a constraint. We'll see that the constraint in Navya-Nyaya is a very unique thing. So this is Gangesha's, a translation of Gangesha's definition. How does it? So it's the first, he offers 3 definitions of Hetvabhasa, and we have taken the first one. And you see also another very important thing, the Nyayika doesn't directly define a sadhetu, a genuine reason. They would rather define an asadhetu, and they would say that a sadhetu is that which doesn't have these defects, right? So a defectless, a flawless hetu is a sadhetu. That's a very, very important thing. So this is what this is Gangesha's shift. Now we have seen this is the old Nyaya, right? See the new Nyaya definition. Now there is no, as I said, there is no different enlisting of the features. Rather, it will be one anugata dharma that will represent all. So here is his definition, not directly, it's kind of constructed, but we'll get slowly into his definition. So this inference, S as T, since S as R, is valid if and only if it doesn't have any inferential defect, right? If it doesn't have a Hetvabhasa. Now we'll see the Hetvabhasa. Now you see, not having any inferential defect itself becomes the anugata dharma that covers all the features the old Nyayika mentions. Now, what is an inferential defect? So again, this is Gangesha's definition. We need to understand it a bit. So the definition is this: the inferential defect of the inference I is the object of a piece of valid cognition whose absence is a necessary condition for the production of I. So the definition is anumiti karanibhuta abhava pratiyogi yathartha jnana vishayatvam hetvabhasatvam. So we will kind of decode this definition. First thing is, it's very easy to understand why a defect, the knowledge rather of a defect, is necessary for the production of the anumiti. Simply because of this. So here is a very simple presentation of it. X's absence is a necessary condition for the production of Y. What does it mean? If and only if X is present, Y does not take place, right? Which actually means that X blocks the production of Y. This is how we understood a blocker. So if X blocks the production of Y, X's absence becomes a necessary condition for the production of Y, right? So this is how we understood a blocker. So the whole understanding is if a piece of knowledge blocks the production of an inference, not that knowledge, but the content, the real factual content of that knowledge becomes the Hetvabhasa, the defect of the inference we are talking about, right? How is it? We will see that procedure. So basically, this is a simplified version. A defect or fallacy of the inference I is the object of a valid or true cognition C, hence a fact, right? Now we will see it anyway, but then we can see what a huge jump it was, right? Instead of enlisting properties, you now have one single lakshana, one single property, one anugata dharma to cover all those features, and then you can talk about all those separately. But also you have a common understanding of all that. Look at the elegance of it, and so many other things. So validity is simply correctness. We are not getting into it, all that tadvyapyasya, tatprakarakatva, and all that stuff. But we simply understand that when I say that a cognition, a snake is valid, it means that thing is a snake that has got snakeness. We just have a very gross understanding of it right now, which means it must correspond to a fact. So if a cognition is valid, then its content must be a fact. So this is a very rough, not very perfect understanding of it, but I think this will do for the time being. Now, blocking. So how blocking works in Indian reasoning. So this is the original understanding. Tadvatta buddhing prati tat abhavavatta nishchayatvena pratibandhagatvam. Right. So the very cognition X is blocked by the cognition, the absence of X, and vice versa, right? So if I know that there is X, I'll not have the cognition. As long as that is there, there is no X, and vice versa. So that is blocking. So the certain cognition, certain means doubt-free cognition, X blocks the cognition, the absence of X. So it means that they block each other. The knowledge of X, the cognition of X blocks the cognition of the absence of X, and vice versa. So for the production of X, the absence of the cognition, absence of X is a necessary condition. That's how Gangesha understands it. So we compare the old and the new. So it's very simple. Now I can define X as this. I can say that X is either 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 11 or 13. This is pretty much like the way the old Nyayika, the Prachina Nyayika understood it, right? That sadhetu must be having feature A, B, C, D, E, right? But the Navya-Nyaya understands it in a very different way. It's something like X is a prime greater than or equal to 13, right? You cover all by having one property. What is it for Gangesha? It is simply this: the inference SST, since SSR is valid if and only if there is no cognition that could block the production of. Now, this should be not no cognition, it should be no valid cognition. I missed valid. That means it must be a yathartha jnana. Only then we get a fact as a blocker. So now you see the blocker is a valid cognition, the blocker is a piece of knowledge, but the Hetvabhasa or the defect is not that. The defect is the thing that knowledge presents, right? This is how we understand the whole thing, right? So now, so you can see that. So I just break it so that we understand. So when I inferentially claim something, when I inferentially claim that SST, since R, I basically claim three things. I first of all claim that any case of R is a case of T, which is Vyapti, without which I cannot establish my claim, my final claim. Secondly, I also claim the site locatedness or the paksha-sattva. That is, S has the reason, right? That S has the hetu. That is, And the third one is the main inferential claim, which is anumiti, which is basically SST. Unless I make these three claims, I do not inferentially claim that thing, right? So from that we go. Therefore, the fact F is a fallacy for the inference SST since R if the cognition of X blocks. You see, F is a fact. So a cognition now represents the fact must be a piece of knowledge. That is the point we are trying to make. The fact F is a fallacy for the inference S as T, since R, if the cognition of F blocks 1, every case of X, R is a case of T, that is the Vyapti, or if it blocks S as R, of it blocks S as T. If any of these three claims is blocked by any fact, or rather a cognition that represents a fact, my inference is bad, right? Now you see, the most beautiful thing is, normally in Western logics, most mathematical logic, whatever, a fallacy belongs to an inference, right? It's a bad inference. But for us, a fallacy is a fact. A fallacy is in the world, out there, right? It's a piece of reality. So that's a huge difference in understanding of fallacy. So what blocks my bad inference? Not something that belongs to my bad inference, something in the real world. That blocks my bad inference, right? This is one very, very important aspect of Indian reasoning. We get into it. Now, the story of inference, right? So somebody who has this cognition, or rather this piece of knowledge that any case of smoke is a case of fire. This is our stock example. All of us use it all the time. So yatra dhumaha tatra vahnihi. And a person like that goes somewhere and they find a hill that has smoke. Which now he remembers that, well, this is a mark, this is a sign, this is a linga for an inference, right? Which is basically for fire. And then after this remembrance, so there is the recollection of any case of smoke is a case of fire. So that is Vyapti smarana. Immediately after that, they actually infer fire. So these are the steps. These are the three claims basically I make when I say that S has T since R, right? Now, and a fallacy is something which blocks or which contradicts any of these claims, right? Anything. Now, how to understand it in the real situation, right? I also think that how I was a student of logic and semantics, and I kind of switched to Indian logic. Because of that, I'm calling it Indian logic. I'm just using it as an umbrella term. I don't mean to say that logic is a good translation of a Tarka Shastra or Nyaya or anything. So, yeah. So it is because of this. I felt that nobody intuits, nobody thinks, nobody reasons the way Western logic presents it. I'm not saying that that's a flaw of it, but then I personally thought that nobody goes through that axiomatic route. Well, these are my axioms, right? And think of Principia Mathematica. There are just 5 axioms and just one law of inference, right? That is modus ponens. And you establish anything, right? And that is the reason you take more than 200 pages to prove that 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Right? It is simply because it must take such a long time and so much of stationery and stuff, because axiomatic systems make it very different to reach your inferential claim. I thought, I don't know whether this is correct or not, that human beings rather think this way. We first infer something and check for the validity, right? Whether my inference was correct or not. Or you tell me something, you use an inference. I may not have it, but I have a tool to evaluate whether your inference is correct or not. So I think that is what they provide us with. Now, a violation of a claim becomes a fallacy, right? We have seen that. So if you violate the first claim, that is SSR, that is site locatedness, that is the hetus being in the paksha, the reasons being the sites, you commit the fallacy called svarupasiddhi, right? If you violate the second one, that is the vyapti claim, you commit the fallacy of vyabhichara or savyabhichara, anikantika. And then the third one, if you contradict the main inferential claim, that is SST, you then commit the fallacy of badha. Right? There are so many other fallacies. We will deal with 5, these 3 and 2 more, so that we we do not get lost in the wilderness. How the fallacy works, it's a very small presentation of that. Now picture this person having some inference machine in the mind and with a database. What is a database? So a database consists of cognitions he takes to be pramāṇika. He takes to be valid. I'm not claiming that they must be valid, but at least this person should be convinced that these are pramanika, right? So because our hetu, our vyavahara hetu, it's like the basis for our ordinary behavior is not really a prama. Of course, in philosophy we talk about pramas, but rather we behave based on the set which we take to be pramanika, right? So we think that this is pramanika, so we are motivated to do something, right? So I would rather say these are jnanani pramāṇatvena abhimatani, right? Not really prama, right? These we take to be prama, right? So that's our database. So the database, you can see this, it consists of these few pieces of knowledges, if you call, so or rather jnanas, which are prama-like. Why? Because as I said, he takes these to be pramanika. And this person, okay, of course, because he has got these cognitions, he cannot infer something that goes against it, but says, during a debate, in a real debate, somebody tells him, for example, this, H3 has fire since H3 has smoke. It has got no problems, right? It has got no contradictory thing in the database, so it passes the gate and it enters the database. This is how our database gets updated. You see, that is how the process of being updated happens. We learn new things through inference like this because there is nothing to contradict it. But then, suppose now somebody again goes somewhere and hears this sentence, H4 has smoke since fire. Now, this is problematic. Why? Look at its provision claim. The provision claim is anything that has fire has smoke. Otherwise, it may be true. That's not a problem. Maybe the main inferential claim, which is H4 has smoke, is true, but that is not the problem. The problem is the provision claim, which is yatra vahnihi tatra dhuma, has got a contradictory fact or a knowledge-like thing in the database, right? This is that. So here what happens is this, S2 directly contradicts it. The moment S2 contradicts it, this person gets to know, well, this inference is not allowed. It will not corrupt my database, right? A gate closes, right? So that it doesn't go and infect my knowledge set. This is the way the Nayayikas understood it. It cannot enter my database, right? Not that I cannot infer. I can infer. I can make bad inferences. But a bad inference will never enter my database, right? So now, for example, this is over. And then there's another inference. This lake has fire since it has got smoke. Again, what happens is I see that, it's all good. But then here is one piece of knowledge, or what I consider to be knowledge, that is, no lake has fire, and that directly contradicts the inferential claim of it. That is, this lake has fire, right? Immediately, a gate closes, right? And again, this piece of thing cannot enter the database, right? So this is how the database is always protected. And that's the whole intention. In a real vitarka, I thought this is how we reason. We do not reason the axiomatic way. We rather reason this way. That is the reason I took it so seriously. Now, that is not the end of it. So this is how also the updating takes place as far as the database is concerned. Again, suppose we have this inference, this hill 4 has fire since smoke. It is again contradicted. What? The Swarupa, no, what is it? The paksha-sattva claim, paksha-dharmata claim of it is contradicted, which is the reasons present in the site is contradicted by this piece of data, that is hill 4 does not have smoke, right? That is part of my knowledge set. Immediately again a gate closes and again it will not enter, right? That piece of raw data will not enter my system to corrupt it. So that's the whole idea of Hetvabhasa. So that's called an unestablished nature or Swarupasiddhi. So that's the story I was trying to say, but then that's not the end of it because there's several Hetvabhasas we didn't actually discuss, but then a few very important. One is Ashriyasiddhi. It is something like this, where the ashraya, the very locus of the whole inference, the paksha is asiddha, it's not found anywhere. This is not a dosha in Western logic, because Western logic is, as we have understood, validity-based, not reality-based. But it's a huge dosha for us. So the absence of golden mountain is the defect in it, right? Because I know golden mountains do not exist anywhere. And this very important dosha, Satpratipaksha, right? So now Satpratipaksha, already I said that one example of Satpratipaksha could be this. I just give you an example. Suppose you know that if somebody consumes veritaserum, it's there in Harry Potter. You speak the truth all the time, right? And if somebody consumes, say, falsitaserum, that person lies all the time. Say, let's imagine a situation like this. Now, here is one person who consumes both and says that yesterday I met an alien. What happens? What do I infer? Is it true or false? I can't infer anything. They block each other because the veritaserum inference kind of makes me think that it is true, while the falsitaserum inference makes me think, no, it is false. So what happens as a result? No inference ever happens, right? There's a complete blockage. They're tied in contest, right? So such kind of tying in contest situations are called Satpratipaksha. Now you see how the hierarchy of Hetvabhasas go. So the first thing is ashraya siddhi. If I have ashraya siddhi, so definitely you don't need any other checking, right? This is the krama of checking. And then the next is badha, right? If you know that there's badha, no checking is needed, right? You stop there. So then you go to this svarupa siddhi again. So the hetu is not there. No checking is needed again. Fourth one is vyabhichara. No, the hetu is there, but you need to find whether the vyapti is there, right? So that is this, vyabhichara dosha. And the last one is Satpratipaksha. So everything is good, but you have to check whether it has got a rivaling reason, right? A reason that proves the opposite of it. So this is the sequence of it. And Raghunatha actually captured all these in his formulation. So he didn't call it lingopadhana mata, but it looks like the lingopadhana mata. I'm not getting into it. In this samanya nirukti diditi, he did it. You see how he formulated anu inference. It is not anymore SST since R. It is rather S, which has R, that is pervaded by T, has T. So this is his representation of anumiti in this thing, in diditi. Okay, so it covers all, as I said. Then we go to, so now as we talk about defeasibility, so we have seen how the database gets, or the knowledge base gets updated through inference. And we will see some other material of reasoning, basically Tarka, the evaluator. So we have so many elements, right, on our list of knowledge. We want to evaluate. How do we evaluate? This is what Vatsyayana says about a Tarka. It is not a pramāṇa, because a pramāṇa must be paricheda phalaka, right? It must cut a piece of reality out and present it in front of you. A Tarka cannot do that. But a Tarka evaluates things you have, right? So you have anything and you have a doubt, is it correct or not? You give it to Tarka. For example, this, does the largest prime exist? No empirical method would give me an answer to this, right? But here's the Euclidean answer, which is basically prasanga tarka for us. This is very similar to what Professor Pandurangi said. That is, you have doubt that kim dhumaha vahni vyapyaha. So this is Gangesha's example. Then you do this tarka. Dhumaha yadi vahni vyapyaha nasyat vahni janyaha nasyat, right? That's a prasanga tarka. So if you assume that, well, there is a largest prime or there is the largest prime, then you land up at a contradiction, right? So in order to avoid that, you say that no, that must not be the case, right? So this prasangataka, one evaluative measure, right? We see whether our database is correct or not. We take a piece and then we use all these tarka. So one is this. So then after the evaluation, we kind of delete the one which the tarka chops off. So in this case, prasanga tarka chops off the yes variety. So no. So that goes now to the database, right? So there is no largest prime. So, and for example, we could have several things. For example, look at this. There are options. We could say that the crow C1 is black and C2 is black, and whatever, and Cn is black, right? And we could also instead say every crow is black. No, this laghava tarka prefers the second, right? And chops off the first. So that is laghava-gaurava tarka. This is how both are correct. You can't say that the first one is not correct. The first one is absolutely correct. But that is not accepted because it has got gaurava dosha. So that's another tarka. And then, so the second one enters our database, right? That is this, every crow is black, not the first one. That is the conjunction of this crow is black and that crow is black and all that. And so here are a few tarkas, the atmashriya, which is circularity, and anavastha, infinite regress, utsarga-apavada tarka, vyatya tarka. There are several tarkas. They help us revise our database, right? And we can see that the database is always provisional, and how Nyaya allows us to have a perfectly defeasible database, which must be revised by using all the pramāṇas and Tarka. So yeah, that's it. I'm done. Thank you very much.